Welcome back to the Culture Base Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. We are the Culture Base. We are.
Oh, is that like a We Are Marshall?
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm like, instead of responding to your cue, I'm like, hey, was that from Remember the Titans?
Yeah. He just
You're like, yeah, dude, maybe play part of this.
Maybe actually just do it.
Maybe I should just do this podcast by myself, Blake.
Maybe. Anyway, episode 54, end of July. We made it. Summer is almost done, which my son told me the other day. We were traveling back from Indy, and he said that he was ready for fall now. I typically this time of the year would be right there with you, but we're doing our beach vacation later this year, like at the end of August. So I am not ready for fall yet, but I will be as soon as like on the drive back from the beach. I'll be like, and fall can start. That's what old men talk about, the weather. That's why you tuned in today. No, today we're going to talk about communication is almost everything. Almost everything. We'll get into that in a second. But before we do, I want to remind you that we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get them there. If you're listening to this on an audio podcast platform, we would love for you to subscribe if that option is there, follow, whatever it says, rate and review if those options are there as well. It helps get this content out further to those like yourself that can benefit from it. If you're watching on YouTube, we're so glad that you're here. You'll notice a little bit brighter look on the side of my face. It's because the afternoon sun's coming around. And normally we record in the morning, but because I was traveling yesterday, we're recording in the afternoon today. So, so subscribe, thumbs up, which is like. That's what they call it. Thumbs up, like, subscribe, ring the bell. That's Blake's favorite part, so that you're notified every time new content drops. As we discussed last week in our resources episode, lots of really cool things coming up, which you can find are actually not even coming up. They're already out at theculturebase.com/resources. Let me get that on the screen for our YouTube fellowship. There it is. theculturebase.com/resources. Some lots of cool things there. Our brand new ebook, the Scalability Playbook, is there for you for free to download. Also for free on there for you to download is the best interview questions ever, a PDF guide from an episode that we did that everyone loved. Everyone knows about it now. It's number one on all platforms in my mind. But there were a lot of people that loved it. So we decided to make that. And of course, you can download a free digital copy of Uncultured by the one and only Blake Bear. Sorry, I said your last name wrong. You know how to say it. Yeah. So you can find all that there at theculturebase.com/resources. All right, on to today's show. Enough about the weather and free stuff. That's just what people like to talk about. Now we'll get into what we need to talk about. And that's communication is almost everything. We've said it a million times, Blake. I'm so sick of it. We're going to talk about that too. Effective communication is one of the most important components in scaling your team through a healthy culture. So where do you start? Who is the voice of communication, and what's your team's default communication style? We're going to get into all of that today on the Culture Base. After the break. No, I'm just kidding. There's no break. There's no break. Let's start off, Blake, with why effective communication is so vital to the scalability of your company. People are just sitting there like, yeah. Talk. It's all talk. I need action. Why is communication so vital to the scalability of your organization?
Yeah. And I think before we get terribly deep here, understanding that the word communication is defined by people so differently. Mm-hmm. Like communication is like that word, like God. Everyone defines it differently.
Yeah.
And yet they mean something, but we don't, it's just one of those ironic things. Like we mean something when we mean communication, but are you talking about how it's presented? Are you talking about how it's received? Are you talking like there are so many different nuances? And even today I had a teammate who was like, hey, I think we need to improve our communication. And I was like, okay, what's that mean? Like what part of communication are you saying is missing? Like, is it team member to team member? Is it team member to office? Is it that we're not communicating certain parts of the project? And they're like, oh, it's actually just about scheduling. And I was like, okay, see, like that's a totally different thing than what I thought you meant when you said like communication's not working.
Yeah, is it a heads up type of communication?
Right.
Is it a debrief type of communication? Is it a, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different lanes you can choose from. It's like when you're driving through major cities and they have 8 lanes per side of the interstate. All those different lanes still going the same way, but there's totally different lanes.
And you might think about this like communication stuff and be like, man, this sounds like there's a lot to communication. Is it really that, like I said it, isn't that okay? Like they if I said it, they should know it and they should know exactly what I mean. And obviously I'm being facetious here, but when you look at the 20% that makes up 80% of the reason why people leave companies, one of those reasons is communication and culture. And so if that's so crucial, and the others are appreciation and the perceived ability to grow, by the way, because if you're like, wow, what are the other ones? But then the other one is communication within culture. And so what does that mean? If there are all these things that work together to make what communication is, and it is one of the top reasons people are leaving your company. Yeah, it's important. Yeah, you just saying what you think you're saying and them not understanding and then leaving and you're like, man, I told them, they just couldn't listen. Okay, see, now we're getting into the nuances that we need to deal with, because there is what we call that rule of 7, that people need to hear something 7 times before they understand that it needs to land. And obviously it's not true all the time, but there's this law of averages, and that you, and not even just like, oh, I need to say it 7 times. Dustin, I need this done. Dustin, I need this done. Dustin, I need this done. Okay, if you're saying it 7 times that way, you're missing communication, because it is not about how you say it that is the most important. It's about how they understand what you're saying to land the freaking plane. And you're going to have to get into, and I know this is not going to be the most popular episode, but you're going to have to get into new ways of understanding what is important in communication. And it's not just what you say. Now we got to start taking into effect all the different generational differences in communication styles we have in those generations. In my book, Uncultured by Blake Bear, because I know Dustin's going to pop it up on the screen here in a second. I'm just not going to deal with it.
I wasn't going to, but now that you say
oh, dang it. I was almost there. Anyway, I go into the generational differences and how we have such generational war at times, and this just dissatisfaction with other generations. And one of the key areas I focus on in that is our communication style, and how and it very much so is generalized to a certain generation. But there are aspects of that we need to understand that people communicate differently. If you're like, man, I sent that Gen Zer an email, I don't know why they're not answering. It's because their email address is called a username, and that's it. Like it's just for them to have a password, essentially.
Yeah.
And they're really dumb email addresses for sure. For the baby boomer, they're going to get irritated when you don't attach them on a email. You've got to CC the BB. Okay. You've got to throw them on they're probably going to read it all. They're going to be up all night anyway. Can't sleep, got to pee. They're going to be reading all this stuff.
You got to CC the BB. Is that what you said? Yeah. That's so good.
And so they're going to go up on it, and it doesn't have anything to do with them, but they want to know. They want to understand the whole of the situation. And they might reply, good point. And that's it. That's all you got from them. But they need that kind of thing. And there are just things that have happened in history through our generations that cause us to be these ways. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what they are. You have to adjust to certain aspects here, and you have to adjust to what is going to land for this person. If this person is not going to understand it because I'm saying it 10 ways, maybe you need to show them what you mean. And so when we talk about this communication, we got to understand that we're not just talking about talking. How do you communicate vision? How do you communicate your platforms. Like, what platforms are you using? How do you communicate your processes? Everything has communication attached to it. That's why this episode is called It's Almost Everything. Okay. Because it's attached to almost everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good message for those that would like to receive.
Yeah, you got the rest. I'm out. See you.
Download that transcript, folks. So let's get into who should be the point person and take the lead on internal communication. Now, I kind of wrote a trick question when I wrote this, and this will be maybe a difference of opinion here on this one, Blake. But I'm going to tell you, I think that if you are sitting around complaining about how bad the communication is in your company and not doing anything to fix it, then the answer to who should be the point person is you. I also think that if you don't identify publicly and regularly who that point person is, could be multiple people, then you're just adding to the confusion and the chaos of the culture rather than clarifying it as best as possible. So, for example, you have a question about something operations related. Who do you go to? If you don't know the answer to that right off the top of your head, and it's not just an assumption, but it's a stated mandate within the organization, then you need to talk about that. So when I ask this question, I'm not saying like, hey, Blake, should it always be the CEO? Hey, Blake, should it always be the operations guy? It's kind of a question within a question, is you should be asking yourself who needs to be the point person for this. And so a lot of times there's project point people, right? Mm. It's project based. Sometimes it's team based. And we'll get into kind of that stuff here in just a little bit when we're talking about different communication channels. But you need to ask yourself at all times, who's the point person for this? This is one of the questions that I never leave a meeting without knowing. Mm-hmm. Right? You get into a meeting that everybody hates. You talk about a lot of things, and then no one puts any action to it for whatever reason. Everybody's assuming someone else is going to take it. But these are the questions that you need to ask. Okay, who's the point person on this project? That means, who do I go to ask any questions on this? Maybe it's a project manager, maybe it's a department lead, doesn't matter. Who's responsible for what? This is all information that you need to know to help streamline. I can't tell you the amount of time wasted in offices or even digital offices trying to track down people to get an answer to a question when 9 times out of 10 that person doesn't even have the answer to that question.
Yeah. And
so not only are you wasting your time trying to running the rat race of trying to maze of trying to figure out who has where the answer is, you're also wasting other people's times by constantly interrupting them, and they're not the ones who have the answer to begin with. So that's my take on who should be the point person. Any thoughts there, Blake?
Yeah, I think point people definitely need to be identified and communicated clearly in a visible way to show who's responsible for what direction of communication. When we're talking about who's responsible for good communication, everyone is. You are. It is your responsibility to make sure that the message lands. Even if it's the ops person who is the one who needs to know and communicate these things, you need to help them. Here's the clarity they need to know to communicate or whatever. I think having good places where people are not hearing tons of voices is important. Hearing a single voice for different things is important. But as far as who's responsible for good communication, I mean, it's 100% you.
Yeah. So let's get into some kind of a buzzword when it comes to communication, and that's consistency. There are a lot of sports fans who get really frustrated at the officials of these leagues because they are not consistent in the way that they call their games, right? Is that a pass interference or is that not a pass interference?
Yep.
Is he down or is he not down? And as a NASCAR fan, we face this week in and week out. They're talking about it on the radio right now because they're like, well, you didn't make a call this past Sunday the way you made a call 2 Sundays ago. We just want consistency. Nothing will breed lack of clarity more than inconsistent communication.
Yeah, so true.
Inconsistent communication. And here's what I want to say about this real quick. I want to get into a couple of practicals. Number one, if you recognize that you're really bad at communication, that's okay. Luckily for you, we live in an age where technology can help us out. I have so many different reminders set on my reminders app, which is also on my computer and also on my phone to remind me of things constantly. My project management software that I use, Asana, I have stuff in there that aren't really even tasks. It's just hey, you need to communicate this. And it's all about, I say this all the time in my coaching, it's all about setting up future you or future team up for success, right? You have to assume that future you and future team is dumb and they're not going to remember anything and they'll have no context at all as to what you're talking about. So what can you do today to ensure that future you is being communicated to well? You can set up reminders, you can set up pings, and we're going to talk about channels here in a little bit. You can schedule things. You can schedule emails, Slacks, just about everything except for phone calls. And even then you probably could just pre-record it yourself and schedule it. I don't know. It's probably out there. But that's one. Just use technology to your advantage for reminders and schedules to communicate and to increase your consistency, because consistency will breed clarity every single time. Number two, a phrase or a tool that we use often at the Culture Base is called this, not that. There are certain words that certain organizations like to use and they don't like to use. And it's not necessarily a personal preference. It's usually centered around the brand or your brand guidelines. Now, you may be in a small enough company where that kind of stuff doesn't exist. But again, it should exist because consistency breeds clarity. Consistency breeds clarity. Remember that. So if you can have different things like, hey, you know what? We don't say, I don't know, give me one, Blake. We don't say
employee.
We don't say employee. We say team member.
Yeah.
Right? Or we don't say vacation. We say time off. Or we don't say customer. We say client, or vice versa. There's so many different things. And the way that you can represent your brand well externally is by really nailing that language down internally first. And it creates a unified message across the board. It doesn't matter how large your team is. If it's one person or 100 people, the consistency is always going to be there. And so one thing that I used to do in the organizations that I worked with previously is I would print off these little like 3x5 cards of this, not that. And I had everybody basically like stick it on their desk somewhere or their computer monitor somewhere so they constantly see that.
Yeah.
So when they're going to write an email that's going out externally and they want to say client, they can go, oh, no, we call them customers. Or, oh, no, we call them clients. It's all right there. You can also build that stuff into if you use Grammarly at work, you can build your brand, this, not that, into Grammarly. And so if someone does inside your company type customer, when in fact it actually needs to be client, that it'll auto replace it because they're logged into your brand's Grammarly, which is super cool. So that's my bit on consistency. What do you got there, Blake?
That's brilliant. I didn't even know to do that with Grammarly. That's awesome. I love the this, not that. And I think there are probably a lot of people who are like, you guys are taking this way too far. And I would say, how is Secretary's Day going? Oh, you don't use that word anymore because it's changed and it's adjusted. And now there's offensive things connected to that. And, oh gosh, I just can't keep up with it. But you have to, because words are changing. Like, and if you're like, this is ridiculous, these damn Gen Zers are changing language constantly. I don't know what bet is. I don't know what on point is. And, like you're throwing all this crap out there. All I can say is we talked in Old English at one point, right? Yeah. Like that happened. We got New English because that sucked.
POV,
and so we were like, we got to fix this. And so,
POV.
Yeah. And we're constantly adjusting. So this isn't new. This isn't brand new. This has constantly been happening for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So let's get to a point where we're okay with this, not that, because it is offering clarity, and there's protection in this too. There's protection in your values in this stuff. So it is very important to do this. I'm not going to keep slamming on this, but that was good. I like it.
Yeah, I'll say this too right before we move on to the next, because we're going to kind of talk about your team's default communication style. But, we talk all the time on here about different values and vision and, cultural importance within your organization. You can't just say it. You have to say it over and over and over again. And so there's some of that stuff that I think we need to talk about here, Blake, in this next section of what's your team's default communication style.
Yeah. So I think there are a few things you can do. One, you got to set what is default for the team, because even though what we were saying earlier about the generational differences and how everyone speaks different, has preferred, some people love to be emailed, some people love text message, some people love some kind of channel where you can just message direct, or a phone call. Like some people love those things, and that there is an aspect that spans different generations, because some people have just grown up in different ways and had different personality aspects. So I would say that you've got to come to a conclusion to say, what is the best way we can communicate certain aspects? We can have some kind of communication platform to convey and separate what we're conveying. We need to have a lot of different platforms. Slack calls them channels. Google Chat would call them chats or projects or teams, right? Like you'll have different names for these things. But when you can separate that, it's going to offer that clarity, consistency and clarity, and it's not going to overburden people when it comes to over information. We, for a long time, had a platform, and it doesn't matter. I don't even care what platform you get. We all have this one's better and for this reason, and this one's, I don't care. And it doesn't matter if you use it well, because we had a thing called Basecamp, and we had a HQ, headquarters, right? Yeah. We had an HQ chat that was for all our company messages. And so we would have people on there celebrating things. And then we'd have people sharing memes or dumb videos of me that they redubbed and made me look ridiculous. And then they would have like, hey, really important about our safety and our insurance updates. And whoa, all of a sudden, all that information created no listening, because it meant, like, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't even look at that anymore because everyone's always talking on it. And if I looked at it all the time, I wouldn't be hearing anything and I wouldn't be getting any work done. And they're not wrong. But when you have channels and you can separate your celebration, you can separate your, hey, these are the company-wide messages, here's our celebrate channel. When you can break that down, you're giving clarity and you're creating a structure. And this is what's awesome about this, is you're helping people understand how to think. You're creating structure for people to start systematizing and setting up in their brain what's important. And our brains need that. You need to see that your brain is like this big filter, okay? And it lets information in, and then it's got to go, in your reticular activating system. Yeah, I am going there. Your reticular activating system, it's got to say, is this important? And it either keeps it or it doesn't, right? It lets it go. It's not important. What Dustin was saying earlier about having reminders and stuff like that being important. It's important. Like, the thing that helped me actually use these channels and actually use these types of things and allow my brain to not hold on to things was the idea that my brain, I want to use it at the highest capacity it can for the most important things I can. Remembering what somebody said about something for some update, I don't even want my brain to do that. Put it somewhere that I can go reference, and all I have to remember is theme or big idea, or where, like, oh, this was a celebration that someone asked me a question about something. I know where to go. I don't have to use my brain for that. I can use it for the big money, right? Like, you want to use your brain for the things that you were uniquely amazing at. Remembering everything that comes into your peripheral is not it. It's just not it.
Yeah. So with that too, having a company default and making sure that everybody understands what that channel is or what that platform is highly important. That's really kind of not just an onboarding sense, but a reminder sense as well. Like you kind of have all this culture stuff that we're talking about and all this scalability stuff that we're talking about. You have to look at it like there's guardrails on either side of the highway, and you're constantly having to kind of go, nope, that's not what we do. Nope, that's not what we do. Or yes, that is what we do. Congratulations, you've arrived. Right? Like there's that journey, that mentality. There are certain people on your team though. You're like, okay, well, for me, like for example, for me, I turn Slack on 3 times a day. Same with my email. First thing in the morning, right in the middle of the day around lunchtime, and then at the end of my day. That's the only time I turn it on. Otherwise, I'm constantly responding to bings and pings and dings and all these different things going off, and I'm never going to get anything done. I think being able to have an expectation of response time in your company handbook, in your onboarding materials, consistently and regularly communicated, even for the people that have been there for 10 years. Hey, just remember our expected response time on this particular platform that we use is blank. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. I wouldn't suggest it be, an hour, because that means people are having to check their email every hour. And again, they're not going to get anything done, because every time they go to it, it's going to take them 10 or 15 minutes to filter through everything, receive the information like Blake was talking about, filter out what's important, what's not important, and then be able to respond with any sort of wisdom at all. It's not going to happen. So just
unless the customer service.
Yes,
right.
That's customer service. You're right. Totally different. Totally different. If it's I'm talking internal emails here. But that's a great point. I think overall we're talking internal communication here today. But yeah, that's a great point too. If it is an external communication, then there's a certain set of rules, and if it's an internal communication, there's a certain set of rules. But whatever it is that you set, make sure that it's agreed upon at the top, and it's consistently upheld all the way down. That includes, Blake, boundaries after hours.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries after hours.
It is way too easy because communication, and I think this is where COVID actually hurt us in a lot of ways, is because we were always home and we were always available because we were clearly nowhere else. We were just there. It was like nobody, like even during COVID, nobody asked, hey, what have you been up to recently?
Yeah.
Where are you at? No.
Yeah. Seen any movies? Right? You've been to the movie theater? No.
Yeah. It's your grass situation right now. It's pretty good. Cool. Yeah. But the problem is it made boundaries blurry. And yet at the same time, it was one of those most technologically forcing times that forced a lot of platforms and video platforms and all these other things to increase their game. And it actually created more of a widespread adoption. And that's a good thing. But the problem is people need time to separate from work. People need time to engage in other areas. And if you can't communicate, and boundaries, this is the other part. Boundaries are not the responsibility of the speaker, the responsibility of the receiver. And so you should, as a good communicator, respect boundaries. But as the receiver, you need to set boundaries and you need to hold boundaries. And so there could be times that, if there's an emergency, I need to call Dustin. Hey, we got an emergency. We need to deal with this right now. Emergency defined really well is important there.
Yep.
But I want in that time him to know, oh my gosh, Blake's calling right now. He doesn't call because he respects my boundaries, that this is not a time I'm going to answer this because it's probably important. Or like, hey, I'm going to jump on this because he's respected all the other ones. But if I don't respect boundaries and everything's an emergency and I finally do have the real emergency and I hit Dustin up and he lets it go to voicemail, well, then I'm dead in the road. Maybe literally. He didn't answer my call. I was waiting to him to come get me.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a lot, but let's just kind of wrap up our time today, like by talking about, hey, if you obviously everything we're talking about today is stuff that you need to incorporate, and it can take time, right? Just like culture, like this new standard, or this new regularity, or even this new clarity. Anytime you introduce clarity, it's going to take time, right? Like Blake said, it's going to take at least 7 times of repeating it. Once you find yourself to be once you are sick of hearing yourself say it, that's when everybody else is just starting to understand it.
Yeah.
You got to remember that. That's a big deal in communication. But let's Blake just kind of leave with 1 or 2 things that they can do to, like, right here, right now, today. What can they start to do to correct the mess of ineffective communication habits, maybe that they've developed in their organization over time?
Yeah, I think one for me is create that structure. Like, if you are like, I don't even know where to start, we don't have anything, I would start with some kind of platform to create structure. Because when you put structure around things, you can communicate differently and you'll start learning the nuances you need to. I think what Dustin just said a second ago about, as soon as you're sick and tired of hearing yourself say it, they're just hearing it. What that also means is that it's important to try to keep energy up. Okay. Keep energy as if this is the first time you're saying it. Okay. Just like, I think about actors in the theater who have to do performance after performance after performance. And they've said this thing a million times, but they're performing it for the person who's seeing it for the first time. And so they're trying, like, what's important is not that you have said the thing that you needed to say. The important part is that that information has action behind it now, and that something's going to happen because it was understood and it's going to be done. And so the way you say it needs to keep that enthusiasm. You can't let that enthusiasm die out as you get to a certain point where you're like, all right, guys, don't forget to fill out your time cards. Okay, they're not going to. Okay, if you're saying it like that, ain't nobody going to fill out a time card. Okay, but if you're like, hey, just reminding everyone, if this doesn't get filled out, you don't get paid. Like, I want you to get paid. It's important you get paid, but I can't pay you what I don't know I need to pay you. And then they're like, oh, I should probably do the time card. Okay, so keep up the enthusiasm as if it's the first time.
I love it. I love it. We could talk about this all day. We could communicate about communication all day.
All day.
Yeah, but we want to respect your time so that you can get out there and start communicating with your team effectively. So, Blake's one takeaway today is pick a platform. I totally agree. I would just say, too, start thinking about what's most important to you to communicate. And start with that one thing and see how consistently you can clear that up. What's the muddiest thing in your organization right now? Let's go to work on clearing that up with some consistency. Make yourself sick of hearing yourself communicate it, and not just communicate it verbally, communicate it digitally as well. Put signs around it, whatever you need to do. Communicate it over and over and over again. So I would just pick one thing and go for it.
And that's also what, even as the culture base, like, think about even what our tagline that we say all the time that could easily be missed. Like, we help leaders know what they're about and show where they're going. Yeah. That's communication. Showing your team where you're going. We would not, I promise you, we would not have created some tagline about showing where you're going if this wasn't one of the biggest issues we see in organizations when it comes to communication. Is they're like, well, I don't know why they left. They said they couldn't grow and they didn't see the vision of the future, but it's there. You're like, that's great. So is space, but I don't see everything in it all the time. You got to be able to show where you're going. And so, we wouldn't have put that in there if it wasn't so crucial.
Yeah, I love it. So go to theculturebase.com/resources. Check out the Scalability Playbook. It's a free ebook for you to download, distribute it all across your team. Go through it as a leadership team. Certainly help your scalability process and your culture improve over time for sure. You can also check out the best interview questions ever PDF guide there, also a free download, and Uncultured by Blake Bear, free digital download on our site as well. Also, from our last episode, every resource that we mentioned in that episode is on our resources page for you as well. If we can help you in any way, please click on the strategy session button, schedule that time with us, hop on our calendar. We would love to help you know what you're about, show where you're going, and develop a scalable team to get there. Next episode, we're back. Episode 55, we're going to talk about building a culture of creativity and innovation. Can't wait to talk to you about that then next time on the Culture Base Podcast.